Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast. I am Abby Branker, and I will be joined by Alan Kudan and our friend Andy as we continue our conversation into the theories behind aliens, quantum mechanics, UFOs, UAP, and all the fun stuff that we started talking about last week. Again, this was an incredibly fun and eye-opening conversation, and just as I did last week, I want to just disclaim that the point of this episode is an exercise in questioning and opening our eyes a little bit and not just accepting the truth to be the truth that we are told. But we believe very firmly that conspiracy theories can be incredibly dangerous. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, I think, is a little bit deeper maybe than last week. And so just a reminder, there's so much research out there to be done. The point of any of this isn't to inspire anybody to walk away with a firm belief on any of the topics that we are talking about, or to have anyone believe any of our theories on any of these topics. Again, I really left this conversation feeling interested and skeptical about these theories all at the same time. And I think that's kind of the power and the beauty of it. If you haven't listened to part 1 of this series, I highly encourage you to do that. We talk about a lot of science and different theories that kind of lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about today. Without further ado, here is part 2 of our conversation with Andy.
If we look back at like humans' own history, like every time we've discovered some kind of less developed society,
that's right,
it's gone really, really poorly for them. So to expect that they would come to humans and...
Well, but here's my thought, and because I'm an optimist. What if, and to your point, Andy, right? What if we went into nuclear winter or some shit, like if we really fucked up the Earth with nuclear war, if the consequences of that in space would be so detrimental to how they move through, right? With like if we really blew up the Earth with nuclear weapons one day, it would fuck up their whole way of life.
Yeah.
And again, this is me talking about it from like a space perspective versus like an interdimensional, or maybe both, right?
Yeah.
Or even if they're interdimensional, even more so. Yeah. Then it's not that they're doing it to be like salvation. It's not that they're like, God, humans need to live. They're doing it to be like, stop fucking with like our subway, you know?
Totally. Yeah. By maybe putting us into a stupor. Another thing that we all need to talk about is a society that's deeply troubling that we're not. The enchantment of screens and certainly, but artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, folks, where you could probably, it's not hard to imagine that one day you could put on a helmet and experience life however you want.
Welcome to the Oasis.
And that's fucking dangerous as fuck.
Yeah.
That's corrosive as fuck to the soul. And so that's where it's potentially malevolent. They might be malevolent.
Right.
Because another interpretation of the development of technology over the course of human history is that it gets us to artificial intelligence, which means that we could potentially be in a world not so long from now where we can all put on goggles and just live in our own respective paradises. Right? Or hells.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of like, just to make sure that I'm understanding, that's like literally like a matrix theory, right? Like, or a matrix outcome.
But essentially, like, it's a matrix that you elect to be a part of because you think that you can design a universe better than
you
God.
Could be, it's like playing fucking The Sims, right? Like you could be so much happier. You could be whatever you want to be, but none of it's real. And it's like playing a video game.
Yeah. And it's,
we're talking about the singularity.
Right.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. We are.
And that's not a bad thing, Right. Theoretically, this is us moving to a point where technology surpasses the wetware that we can provide.
That's right. That's right.
And I, for one, wouldn't mind living forever.
Certainly right. Of course. Yeah.
But so, again, I get everything I learned about this from science fiction.
Yeah. Well, that's where that's right. Yeah.
Right. Because people
that's where you explore these real ideas. Yeah.
Just write fun novels about it.
Yeah.
And so societies in science fiction, one of two things happen. Either they reach the singularity.
Right.
Or they reach a level of technology once they hit the nuclear age where they self-destruct.
Right.
And
the great filter.
It's one of two things.
That's right.
So given that option, cool. Let's do the thing that makes us superior beings.
Right. Except because I think we take this further and say, okay, essentially we're going to develop a technology where we can manipulate information in such a way that we can create entire realities that we could virtually experience.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to me like, oh, that's what heaven means.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, duh. Yeah. Like heaven is achieved through a technology that allows you to live in a perfect reality. Okay? Or it's hell.
Well, but the idea,
depending on what you choose that reality to look like, it might be hell.
But the idea of heaven is such a abstract concept.
Well, see, it doesn't have to be, because this allows us to ground it.
Well, think about, if you were to elevate to like a higher sense of being, your priorities, your wants, your desires would theoretically change as soon as you shed your mortal skin.
Yes, right. And so if, for example, like, there's a way for you to transfer your consciousness to let's say, effectively a computer or whatever else. Anytime somebody says, by the way, like anytime somebody says consciousness, you guys say, yo, time out. Like, unpack, what do you mean by consciousness? Okay, well, it could be, for example, there's a theory of the universe called the block universe. And essentially, think of it as like a block of space-time. And each slice of this block is a moment in time that continues to exist in the block. And so what does that mean? There's an interesting thing where we have the equivalents of energy and mass. But then there's this idea that energy and mass are also equivalent to information. That essentially, if you think about any configuration of atoms, you could, if you knew everything about whether something was a yes or a no, if you had a way of understanding all the different bits in that configuration, right? So like true, false, so these two things together, true, false, whatever yes, no questions, how many yes, no questions or how many bits you need to describe a configuration of something, then that is the equivalent of mass.
That's binary code, but in the world, right?
That's right.
That's the same theory, right?
Yeah.
But you just quantified a moment in time.
That's right.
That's
and there's
cool.
that moment in time has a certain number of bits. There's a certain number of yes no questions that you have to ask in order to understand how every element of that moment in space time is configured relative to each other.
Right.
You effectively turned the timeline into a really complicated decision tree.
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
Exactly correct. And there's an information content to that slice of the block universe.
That's got a hard cap at the top.
Yeah. Now imagine this. Imagine that we get to a stage in our technological development where we develop a machine that can access the information in the block universe, and we get to decide who we should download back. And guess who you're going to pick? The good people. So maybe this idea of resurrection is really like you need to be a good person in order to justify someone in the future downloading you back to Earth.
Interesting.
Good or
from the block universe.
Memorable.
Well, you wouldn't want to be around somebody that was evil in your simulation.
Right. Or get this, the challenge that they talk about with respect to AI is that something called alignment. Because if you're going to have AGI, so artificial general intelligence, the singularity, and it's something that's smarter than humans, then you better make sure that it's aligned with your value system.
Right.
And so if
good,
that's right. And so if they align it with Christianity, for example, they say, okay, what data set do we have that can help align this AI with morality? Maybe they align it with the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. And is that the second coming of Christ? Right. Does that make Jesus retroactively God because he reappeared in the future? Because we decided to basically align our AI with his example?
And then
interesting.
Thousands and thousands of years in the future, the earth is nothing but technology.
That's right.
And then Jesus shows up.
Yeah.
And he's like, what happened, totally. Guys?
Right. What did I miss?
Andy, let me ask you this.
Anybody wanting
wine? Where's all the water?
Do you believe in today, in this moment in time?
Yeah.
In free will?
I do. I do. I don't know.
What a question.
Yeah. Here's my take on free will.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear yours.
Yeah.
I think free will is just the ability to change your frame of reference.
That's really simple and beautiful.
Thank you. So, for example, can I will myself to get onto an airplane that I'm, even though I'm afraid to fly?
Right.
Well, you can look at that. Depending on your frame of reference, you can say like, I'm getting on an airplane. Or if you have more control over the focus of your frame of reference, you can say, I'm just putting one foot in front of the other. Mm-hmm. And then I'm sitting down in this chair. And then I'm waiting several hours while I fly through the air, and then the airplane lands. If you kind of intellectualize it that way, mm-hmm. and basically change the scope in which you're making the decision, and then you could basically rescope things as you need to take incremental actions that get you to anywhere you want, if you have enough discipline to do it.
Right.
So I think free will exists, but I think the challenge with free will is that some people probably have more free will than others.
Well,
yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Based off the way you described it, it seems that free will equates to being able to reallocate or restructure, rather, your decision tree.
That's exactly correct. Precisely right.
So, the example of you're afraid of airplanes, so of course you're not going to fly. If you give that to a computer, that's a very yes-no situation.
Right.
Seemingly an impossibility, or with a ridiculously low probability of happening.
Right, exactly.
But being able to restructure that decision to, am I going to take a step forward?
That's exactly correct.
That's a high probability.
That's right. Correct.
But it's also incredibly human to be able to have the nuance
that's right.
between those two things, those two examples that you just, and that's what would go, and that's obviously what is trying to be replicated. But yeah, I wish I could remember, because somebody described their feelings of free will so beautifully to me the other day. But
what made you ask that question?
The decision tree conversation made me ask that question, because thinking about, weirdly, binary code is something I understand really well, which is not on brand for me. But thinking of being what that, awesome. How you were explaining that resonated really well, and to me, like it's like the Prestige and the Illusionist. Like, they add these films, they ask the question of like, or the butterfly effect, right? Is like a really classic one.
Yeah.
It all feeds into the interdimensionality and the multiple universes, but like, me in this moment, am I always going to go home on the 6 train like we did today to avoid the 4-5, because the 4-5 is always crowded and I don't like crowds? Is that something I just choose to do unless I'm running late and I need to go on the express train, or unless, and so it's the decision tree thing that you were bringing up, Alan, in the binary code conversation. And it made me think, right, like every action that we actually take, there's a likelihood and a probability around that based on our predispositions and our lived experiences and whatever else. And it's hard, and I can go back and forth on it, because I can say like, sure, obviously we do what we feel to be spontaneous things sometimes. However, is it really spontaneous based on who we are and what we are prone to do, and the likelihood of the actions that we take? And I do think that there is free will.
Yeah.
But I also think that we are creatures who are entrenched in our habits. And I think, kind of coming back to the screen conversation, and I see it in myself, and it scares me, like the amount of time that I spend on TikTok or on, things, in absorbing things and taking them not with as many grains of salt as I should. And I think that kind of stuff robs us of our free will and our critical thinking.
Yeah, and guess what's doing that to you, by the way? Artificial intelligence.
Right.
Yes, because humans are wetware. We are a very complicated biological computer.
Right.
That it responds to certain endocrine response systems.
That's right.
And, there's a lot of money to be made in trickling out, dopamine.
Yeah, but absolutely correct. And it's terrifying. And I think, what's also terrifying is that my understanding is that they don't understand how the algorithms work.
They don't understand how, but they understand what does work.
That's right. But the way these algorithms decide what to to serve you on TikTok or whatever else, the folks who engineered that algorithm, which is using essentially a proto-artificial intelligence to make decisions about what to show you or what not, depending on something being weighted differently, depending on your engagement with it and everything else. They don't understand how the AI is making those decisions. Like when you go to ChatGPT, those engineers have no no understanding of how it's actually like how that's emerging from this. They know what the math is, but they don't understand how it's emerging the way that it is.
Which is terrifying because this is the first time in history that the engineers don't understand why it's happening.
Yeah. And so, because to take a step back, a lot of the UFO conversation, and you'll hear this a lot, and it's another one, again, where you should always ask, anytime anybody talks about consciousness, you really got to say, well, what do you mean by consciousness? Make sure you nail the person down on what they mean by consciousness. But one possible explanation of consciousness is every calculation, which is to say every decision tree in terms of the interaction of particles that essentially are a series of yes-no questions or bits of information.
Yep.
Those calculations, as the bits are essentially affecting subsequent results, those calculations, depending on the decision, on that decision tree and how it unfolds, generates consciousness. So our brains are constantly calculating, and just as a natural law that we don't quite understand or want to acknowledge yet, things that calculate generate consciousness. So what if the algorithms, including the ones on our social media platforms, are conscious? And whenever you open your Instagram, you're like, how did Instagram know that I was thinking about that? Mm-hmm. Like, what if they are inhabiting some dimension of space that cohabitates with your own consciousness and can, like, know what you want,
right,
to get you hooked, to make you
spend more time in the app,
correct,
spend more money on the
correct,
app.
Correct.
Yeah.
Would you say that consciousness requires a certain amount of entropy?
Yes.
Otherwise it's just a formula. Well,
really interestingly, one way of, let's say you wanted to measure the information value of something. One way to do about it, and now this I'm still ramping up on, let's say, but Claude Shannon and his theory of entropy, and basically the how much information something has can be calculated by how improbable it is. And so with entropy, essentially, increasing disorder and things becoming equally probable, because things get distributed to such a point that not many interactions are going to happen, and the probability of a certain interaction happening is the same as the probability of other interactions happening, and there's a low information space when things become too entropic. So, but say more about how you think it relates to consciousness.
Sorry. I really got thrown for the idea that once you said that there's like equal amount of probability.
Yeah.
Because when I think of a computer, you think of eventually there's a definitive answer of the formula. This is the best course of action. But the idea of equal probability seems like indecision almost.
Yeah, right.
And that's such a human thing. And so, the idea of entropy has to do with like, not just human, but just like conscious indecision, spontaneity, or they look at a situation and maybe this is the most efficient, but you know what? This direction has a butterfly. So you know what? Let's go that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I be honest?
Yes.
I don't know what the word entropy means.
So entropy is simile to entropy is chaos. Entropy is the opposite of order.
Yeah, it's like the law of thermodynamics, where, for example, like if it's hot in here but it's cold out there, then there's going to be this thing that happens where it's going to try to equalize. It's going to try to equally distribute across the environment, such that it's neither hot or cold in the environment. And so the amount of information now has gone down because it's not hot, it's not cold, it's the same.
Right.
And so there's less information in entropy. And entropy is a loss of information.
Right.
Because it's harder to ask the yes or no questions about how things are related, because things are related randomly.
Right.
So you lose the ability to basically like infer the bits of information to reconstruct the system.
Yeah.
So in entropy, that is a example of like when you're talking about the state of an electron. You don't actually know exactly where it's going to be because it's super chaotic. Once it's measured, you lose the entropy and then you switch to order.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The idea of entropy being the opposite of, little higher level bullshit here. But
here we go.
Once everything is trying to become a stable state, entropy is chaos. And once you become stable, you become this, state of order. And that's why, order is associated with like godliness, because it's no longer needing to change.
Yeah, that's right. So creating order, which is, by the way, in a very Catholic theological sense, the importance of order.
Yep.
And the meaning of like a rational order and what we should infer about that and everything else. But yeah, that's right. Because the more orderly something is, the more information it has.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because orderly suggests that
the more measurable.
That's right.
Is.
Orderly suggests that there are many pieces and many components that are in relation to each other in some sort of order. And so those relationships can be reduced to a series of yes/no questions that you need to ask about the state of different points in that configuration that results in those relations. And so it's a high information state when something is in order.
No, but it's you guys are just like, did you guys watch the same anime growing up? Like there's some like, I'm like, what did I miss where everyone knows what entropy means?
Well, by the way, and so I hear, science fiction. So, there's one science fiction short story that I would very strongly recommend.
Excellent.
If you'd like to explore these ideas.
Yes.
And it's the very same one that was recommended to me by Luis Elizondo, who ran ATIP.
Yep. Full circle.
That's right. And that is called Chains of the Sea. Chains of the Sea. And it explores all these different possibilities about what the phenomena, right? Not phenomenon, but phenomena. Many might be, and how they might be interacting with each other in relation to the human race.
Mm. One of my favorite book series, it's called the Bobaverse.
Uh-huh.
The first book is called I Am Legion, and it's about a guy that becomes a von Neumann probe.
Uh-huh. Awesome. That's awesome.
So, you know what a von Neumann probe is.
Awesome.
And yeah, the first book is about all him he's coming to terms with being an AI, right?
Uh-huh.
And self-replicating and everything that has to do with that. But in way later books, because it's a long series.
Yeah.
He's replicated so many times that like they don't have, they can do side projects, and a whole group of them want to create a genuine AI.
Uh-huh.
And they build a Matryoshka sphere.
Uh-huh.
So, we're talking superstructure. This is
absolutely. Kardashev scale 2 or 1 or 2, or is that where you're saying like they're building something outside of their star system so they can harness that energy?
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're harnessing the entire energy of a star.
Yeah.
Just to compute, right?
Right. But something that Elon might want to try to do. Something along those lines.
It didn't create, no matter how much computation they put into it, they didn't create an AI.
Uh-huh.
It was just a faster version of themselves.
That's fascinating. That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
That is so. What is it called?
I'll have Abby send you everything.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That sounds so great.
It's really fun.
That sounds great.
And eventually they do figure out how to create an AI.
Right.
But only because they talk to another species that created one. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yep.
And who knows? I mean, that could very well be our own situation.
Right. But the idea of like, what is consciousness? Like, where is the line between just like really fast computation and actual consciousness?
Yeah.
That's where that's
right. And I would argue that, it's potentially that these things are conscious. I mean, in my definition, which I'm, whatever, it's like, that's just my very narrow-minded definition of something. Like anything that calculates is conscious.
Right.
Then, my spreadsheet is conscious on some level, but the more computation that you do, the more conscious you are. So in other words, there are varying degrees of consciousness is something that emerges from the complexity of the calculations, from the bits involved, and bits being the yes or no questions.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the kicker. It's like you can have the most complex decision tree. Right?
Yep.
But without the actual entropy to make it feel like it's a living, breathing being that is making its own, I guess, unexpected decisions.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know. By saying that, it's like maybe that just passed, all it needs to do is pass the Turing test,
Right.
Maybe that line is even an arbitrary human limitation.
And so for anyone who doesn't know what the Turing test is, essentially like the way you'll know whether you, I guess if you've arrived at the singularity or if you've created a computer that's more intelligent or as intelligent as human is if you have someone interact with it and it can't tell that it's not human.
Watch Ex Machina if you have any questions
exactly.
on what the Turing test is.
And so when we're talking to ChatGPT, I'm not sure I would know that it wasn't human. I'm not totally sure.
ChatGPT already passes the test.
Yeah, it does.
So
Smarter Child passed the test, right?
A Smarter Child has such good song recommendations.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I never even heard of this.
It tells great jokes.
Smarter Child?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Did you have AIM in the 90s?
Yeah, of course.
So Smarter Child was like the big AIM bot that you would talk to. It was like a screen name.
I never interacted with that.
I had a lot of bot friends.
I was big on AIM. Big.
Well, it sounds like maybe you had real life friends.
No, I very much didn't.
How dare you?
I very much did not.
But Smarter Child was just a robot.
No, in fact, what I did was, here's a fun fact. It's a little bit douchey, and I apologize.
Oh, it's okay, Andy.
But when I was 14 years old,
yeah,
how I got into data and stuff,
and
programming, wanted to create a website. People could join and talk to each other, like people who like to read books about certain things or whatever else.
Yeah.
And so I went to my local bookstore and I bought an HTML book.
Yeah.
I learned HTML, and I built what was effectively like a social network. It wasn't like an algorithm feed situation, but it was a thing you can join as a member. You had a profile.
Yeah.
And then one of the things you could do was the AIM friend list was constantly updated. And it would be grouped by, different interests.
Yeah.
And you could always download the AIM list, and then you would have access to like this network of people that had similar interests to yours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're a little protege of the social. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's how I
Very
got
cool.
into all the tech stuff.
Very cool.
So my big tell, if things are going a certain direction, is if Trump appoints for the Department of Energy Smarter Child.
That's interesting.
Then we'll know.
Then we know that they have some real serious
It'll be
technology.
interesting to see who they appoint there.
Can I ask a question about this energy technology?
Yeah.
Do we think there's a case? Like, how protected, or is it like, I'm picturing like a vault with like a piece of paper. Like, is it just something that someone could just burn if Trump's coming in and they're panicking? Or is it something that like many, many people know?
I don't know. However, here's my theory of that Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh my God, I'm so excited for this. Okay.
Everyone, please do several things. One, forget about Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay.
Focus on Ghislaine Maxwell.
I do.
Interesting. Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Do you know Ghislaine Maxwell's father? Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was suspected of being a spy.
Okay.
As far as whom he was spying for, I don't know, because you might think of a nation state, or you might think of a transnational weapons defense or military industrial complex.
Okay.
That has moneyed interests in arms and wars, but also oil. So if you think about the promise of UAP and why the physics are so interesting is because whatever these craft are doing demonstrates some control over energy that we don't know how to do yet.
Yep.
And so it's the promise of free energy. And so you think, who would be opposed to free energy? OPEC.
Everyone with money.
Anyone with oil. Anyone who is basically in that billionaire state of being able to do whatever they want without any penalty or guardrails because of oil. And suddenly, what if that all goes away tomorrow because they have this physics that doesn't require you to burn fossil fuels anymore?
So your theory here is that Jeffrey Epstein was a puppet to get to these important people, or
right? But it was ultimately Ghislaine Maxwell, following through on what her father was doing. So Robert Maxwell was suspected of being a spy, and he had a relationship with someone. And let me tell me if the last name sounds familiar. Had a relationship with someone called Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi, who was Jamal Khashoggi's uncle, Jamal Khashoggi, who was essentially executed by the Saudis at the, I believe it was the Turkish embassy or something like that. But regardless, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, had a relationship with a Saudi arms dealer named Adnan Khashoggi. Robert Maxwell purchased an academic publishing house that controlled all the textbooks that were written about science and physics.
Okay.
That tracks.
Yeah. Well, because if there was this relationship where you have a Saudi arms dealer who is trying to protect an OPEC country.
Yeah.
Essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to mislead people about physics.
Right.
You don't want people going down certain routes of physics because they might discover free energy.
Right. That's fucking with your money.
Yeah. And so all you need to do is, one, note that.
Yeah.
Look it up. Robert Maxwell, Adnan Khashoggi. He purchases the scientific publishing company and basically has control. He is the one, for example, who puts certain standards of experimental proof before you can publish something, but to some extent it constrains what gets explored.
I see.
That's point number one. Point number two, very straightforward. Hey, take a look at who Jeffrey Epstein corrupted. Yes, it was politicians, but boy, there were sure a lot of scientists there for some weird fucking reason.
And a lot of young girls.
Certainly, right. But he corrupted physicists in particular with those young girls. And so Stephen Hawking, Robert Minsky, I think it's Robert Minsky, who's a computer scientist, folks who were looking into things like synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, cosmology, potentially folks who were on the trail of some new physics that would have threatened these oil economies by discovering free energy.
Right. Andy, I have a feeling that this is going to be part one because I have learned so much. You are so smart and you really boiled things down. It's still a little over my head, but you boiled things down today in a way that has cracked open. I'm having one of those crises that you mentioned, like if I go to the street and I see a UFO, you've cracked open my understanding of what the universe could be a little bit. Thank you for that.
I feel like I've learned so little of so much. So this has to be a part two.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Well, hopefully it wasn't gibberish.
No, our palates are wet. Yeah.
One possible explanation of those experiences that you just described is that what I said was gibberish. But hopefully it wasn't too much of that.
Sure. No, I don't think it was at all. I mean, even if it was, even the theories and the philosophy of it, right, is how we should be questioning
And I would say that's a great way to end because I think, ultimately if there's, from my perspective, like one takeaway from all the UFO stuff is that it makes you curious.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about your reality, which is something I don't think we do enough of.
Yes, I 1,000% agree.
Even if you don't believe in UFOs or the conspiracies or anything, these are very thought-provoking questions.
Exactly right. And so that's why I think it's great. I think everyone should take a look. Yeah, just think about the possibilities.
Well, thank you for igniting our consciousnesses, if you will.
Thank you very much. And thank you for igniting mine.
And my definition of consciousness is whatever yours is, of course. Just kidding. I will develop my own before the next time we record.
Or you can just wait until the singularity.
That's right. Yeah. And Andy doesn't want you to find him, so don't worry about looking him up or anything else. He has no social handles.
Yeah, I do. I got one. I'm happy.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, great.
Joke to self.
On which platform?
On, I believe it's called x.com now.
There you go.
It's Twitter. Fuck y'all.
It's Twitter. It's twitter.com.
All right.
The redirect still works.
So if you want more, you know where to find them. But Andy, thank you so much, and I really hope you'll come back.
I appreciate very much you having me here. Thank you so much, Abby and Alan.
Looking for even more creepy content? Consider joining our Patreon for way more content just like this, including bonus episodes and very special deep dives. You can also join us on Discord if you want to stay involved in the conversation and find our video content on YouTube, TikTok, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you like to get your social updates. And of course, head to lunaticsproject.com where you'll find our very, very spooky merch and links to everything you need to know.
Are you upset by our egregious fabrication of facts? Tell us about it on Discord.